2028 BCE. Yes, the Neo-Sumerian Empire may have had a bit of a shaky start, and it's been through its bit of tumbles and hits, but you know what, ibbi-sin? It looks like things are looking pretty good. Oh no. Oh no. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to you lads and ladies around the world, and welcome back to the twilight of the Neo-Sumerian Empire, where after some tumultuous times under the reigns of Amar-Sin and Shu-Sin, the sons of Shulgi, the son of Shu-Sin, ibbi-sin, is now in place to take the throne in 2028 BCE. However, having its invincibility tested by both rebels, Amorites, and maybe even the daringness of the Elamites, it seems the Neo-Sumerian Empire is starting to crack and fracture, and not just because of the events happening around mankind. It seems that even nature is conspiring against this once secure and stable empire. And in order to put this into context, let's do a little comparison between this civilization and another one on the other side of the Arabian Peninsula, that of our friends in ancient Egypt. For these two Bronze Age civilizations, although similar in the fact that they existed alongside two mighty river networks, the difference comes in the sense that one of these river networks is far more stable than the other. The Nile and its regular and predictable flooding could be measured, timed, and as a result, harvest and planting seasons could be regularly arranged around this river. Furthermore, the constant flowing and great quantities of water and silt from the River Nile brought fresh nutrients into the farmers' fields to help grow a bounty of different crops, leading to ancient Egypt becoming the breadbasket of the ancient world for centuries and even millennia to come. However, in Mesopotamia, this river network is dominated by the unpredictable two rivers of the Tigris and Euphrates, whose floodings could be either little or great enough to sweep away entire tracts of farmland. This could then perhaps imply that the Neo-Sumerian Empire's base foundation of agriculture around the Euphrates and Tigris rivers was perhaps almost as fragile, even comparable to that of the agricultural situation surrounding the early Shah dynasty in China in the Yellow River Basin. Although seeing as we are very much part of nature despite claiming to hold dominance over it, it must be said that humanity and nature often go hand in hand, and it's here that we run into yet another problem: over-agriculturalization. In basic terms, this is when a patch of land is over-farmed, when it is farmed so much that the nutrients in the soil that give the crops life are depleted far faster than they can be replenished. This situation in the Neo-Sumerian Empire was not helped by the fact that this region had been plagued at the time by years of relentless drought and very little rainfall, leading to the rivers Euphrates and Tigris not being able to carry enough silt, minerals and nutrients to help keep the Neo-Sumerians' farms from flourishing, and as a result, year after year, perhaps not noticeably at first, the farmers' yields in Sumeria began to decrease and decrease and decrease. And in these times, that could certainly spell disaster for major cities such as those in Ur, Uruk, Nippur and even early Assur to the north. And it can be said then that as a result, the price of foodstuffs such as grain skyrocketed. Furthermore, in these times, there was no such thing as a coin-based economy. Therefore, goods were often exchanged in kind, with items such as copper and essentially grain being exchanged in order to pay for certain goods and services. and with grain becoming in increasingly short supply and also getting more expensive by the year in this civilization, it is no surprise then that almost from the very moment that ibbi-sin sat on the throne of Ur, that problems began showing themselves immediately. For not long into ibbi-sin's reign, 2025 BCE, Cimmerian, a client state sandwiched between the lands of the Neo-Sumerian Empire and the Elamites, rose up in rebellion against ibbi-sin, even helping certain nomadic tribespeople in the mountainous regions of the area. However, if sources are anything to be believed in this matter, Cimmerian was easily crushed by the Neo-Sumerian forces, led personally by ibbi-sin, who was said to have absolutely annihilated the city of Cimmerian in recompense for aiding and funding rebellious tribespeople in the mountains. And it wasn't just the rebellious peoples of Cimmerian that caused ibbi-sin so much trouble, for despite the fact that the Sin brothers were long gone from the throne, the problem of the Amorites persisted even into ibbi-sin's reign, so much that their incursions during his reign became more and more frequent into Sumerian territory, disrupting lines of communication, meaning that contact with far-flung provinces began to break down. And this, of course, was when a people that was under the heel of the Sumerians sensed a strong weakness within the city of Ur. That's right, the Elamites are back, and they are out for Sumerian blood. But before we can discuss the very final days of the Neo-Sumerian Empire in depth, we must first take a look at the fact that the incursions of the Elamites of all people were a consequence of several different factors that cascaded into one another. First of all, you had droughts caused by low flow of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, which meant that food production was not as bountiful as it had been under the reigns of previous monarchs of the Neo-Sumerian Empire. This left the agricultural production system of the empire in a very precarious and delicate state, which could be disrupted or tipped over the edge by, I don't know, maybe a bunch of nomadic tribespeople constantly poking and prodding deeper and deeper into the empire, disrupting communication lines, destroying fields, villages and towns, and therefore further reducing the state of food production within this civilization. And with the power of the city of Ur essentially being kneecapped by these two factors, the Elamites, sensing a lack of confidence and strength in the Sumerians, saw their chance to declare independence and as a result attack this now extremely weakened and exposed region of southern Mesopotamia. However, to make things even worse, it wasn't just external threats that plagued the Neo-Sumerian Empire at this time, for records have shown that roughly in the year 2020 BCE, the 8th year of ibbi-sin's reign, due to incursions by the Amorites and many poor harvests, the price of grain was said to have skyrocketed to 60 times its original value before ibbi-sin even took the throne. This, of course, although we don't have any definitive evidence of this, would likely have caused riots. And naturally, we humans just do not like it when there's either a shortage of food or the price of food skyrockets. The same can even be said for the modern era, because hey, you're not exactly smiling with glee when the price of, say, bread or fruit suddenly triples in price without warning. And of course, ibbi-sin just could not catch a break in these times. Perhaps to the man himself sitting on the throne, it could have seemed very well that his gods had abandoned him, that they really wanted his empire dead and gone. And the empire was in such a weakened state that it took ibbi-sin 17 years of his reign to properly deal with the Amorites, to at least try to calm the incursions they had made, with an inscription dated to the year 2011 BCE claiming that ibbi-sin had at last crushed the Amorites and brought them to heel under his kingship. However, by this point it was too little too late, and an economic collapse within the next few years of catastrophic proportions hit the Neo-Sumerian Empire. Rampant inflation, food shortages, and even some governors starting to turn treacherous all but brought the Neo-Sumerian Empire to its knees. And so, in the year 2004 BCE, the king of the newly independent Elamites, Kindatu, attacked the city of Ur directly. And the city of Ur itself was placed under a grueling siege by the Elamites. Ibbi-sin, in desperation, begged other cities for help in this hour of need. However, only one governor was said to have responded. This governor on the surface appeared at first to have been willing to help ibbi-sin. However, he charged the now weakened king extortionate prices for grain in order to alleviate the hunger situation within the besieged city of Ur, and as a result communication broke down between Ur and its nearest cities, with this treacherous governor even declaring himself the king of Sumer, whilst ibbi-sin was still very much alive within the city walls of Ur. However, after a grueling siege which had lasted for 3 to 4 long years, the city of Ur finally was forced to throw open its gates and surrender to the Elamites waiting outside. And to the Sumerians living at the time, this was not just the fall of a king, but the fall of their very way of life. The ruler of the Neo-Sumerian Empire, the last ruler of this empire, ibbi-sin, was carried off in chains by the Elamites. And the great ziggurat of Ur, said to be the home, the very house of the city's patron god, was plundered and looted, with its statuaries being carried off to the land of the Elamites. This, to the Sumerians living at the time, was like the plundering of the city and empire's very soul, with the king being carried off in chains and later dying in captivity of the Elamites, who had at last risen up and crushed their Sumerian overlords. And certain literature exists that may just help us capture a glimpse as to what Sumerians alive at the time must have thought, witnessing the collapse of their very world and way of life. Quote, An, Enlil, Enki and Ninhursagr have decided its fate, to overturn the divine powers of Sumer, to lock up the favourable rain in its home, to destroy the city, to destroy the house, to destroy the cattle pen, to level the sheepfold, that Shimashki and Elam, the enemy, should dwell in their place, that its shepherd in his own palace should be captured by the enemy, that ibbi-sin should be taken to the land of Elam in fetters, that from Mount Zabu on the edge of the sea to the borders of Akkad, like a swallow that has flown from its house, he should never return to his city. Close quote. This piece of literature, the lament for Sumer and Ur, captures quite vividly the despair that must have been felt by the Sumerian populace upon the defeat of their great king, and now the land was given over to the Amorites and the Elamites. However, this would not be the end of Sumerian culture entirely, for in some small ways it continued to survive long after the last ruler of Sumer was carried away in chains. For what the Sumerians did for the world even bleeds into the modern day society today. The base number of 60 used to measure time is still very much in use on a day-to-day basis to this very day. Furthermore, Sumerian architectural styles would persist, with ziggurats even being built in the one-day great city of Babylon, where its ruler Hammurabi would create a law code that in some ways persists even today. And it just goes to show that across the sands of time, our ancient ancestors still speak to us in small ways that are perhaps unnoticeable on a day-to-day basis. However, we take a lot of lessons from them each and every day, reinforcing the importance of learning about these early civilizations and preserving their memory for generations to come. So, if you enjoyed this video, perhaps consider leaving a like and make sure you're subscribed so that you don't miss out on any future updates on the history of our world and its cultures as part of the Grand Portfolio. For now though, I'm Lewis of the Grand Portfolio, and thank you for watching.